Welcome back, and thank you so much for clicking on the video. So today I'm here with Vincent Clay, which is actually a little bit strange that I'm interviewing him because we're such good friends and we've known each other for 3 years now.
Yeah.
About that time. Yeah. So, but I ended up asking you to write me a piece of music, and we're going to be playing it this coming Thursday, which will be February 28th, 2019. So my hope is to get this video up, so then it's kind of a little bit of a come and see the piece after you.
My hope is that you do it too.
Yeah.
So we promote the concert.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I know a little bit about you and about your parents and like what they did and stuff. But can you tell everybody a little bit about like your upbringing and how you came to the piano and how you came to composing?
So I was raised in a musical family. Both my parents played guitar and sang, and but my mom and my dad, they were more folk singer, guitar players, and my dad was a folk singer songwriter. He put out a contemporary Christian album he wrote, and we used to go to concerts with him as kids, and we'd travel around and he'd be always singing and playing music, and so that music was a big part of my life as a young person. I had a guitar when I was 6 or 7 years old, little guitar for me. And so, but around that time, actually around 6 or 7, I got interested in piano. And I did not have a piano at my house. But my grandma had a piano at her house. So we would always go over there. As Italians, you go over to your grandma's house for pasta dinner. Every week, every Sunday, pasta dinner at grandma's. And so, there was that piano sitting there. And evidently, so the story goes, because I was too young to remember a lot of this stuff. But I would go, play on the piano. My grandma would be like, "Oh, sure, you can go play on the piano." But she would always be like, "Oh, he's just gonna go bang on the piano like all those other kids."
Yeah.
But she said I would sit there and listen and pick out, melodies. So it was different than a lot of the other kids. And so from there, they moved that same piano, to my mom's house because I got more and more interested in it. I took with my mom for a few years until I could pass her up. Played a piece that was the most she could play ever on piano. And then I got with a neighborhood teacher. And so from there, I stayed with her till about a year before I went to college. And then during that time period, I kind of discovered classical music, really, because you can go through piano and learning an instrument and not, depending on the teacher, not really learn about the beauty of like Schubert and Mozart and all these great composers. And so I was not exposed to that. It's not a part of my parents' upbringing, classical music, only peripherally. So I discovered it at the Houston Public Library. There was a CD of Mozart and Bach and Schubert, and specifically Schubert's Impromptu, like A-flat Impromptu, stood out to me as just incredibly beautiful. And so I took that to my teacher at the time, and I basically gave her an ultimatum. I was like, I'm going to learn this piece, or I'm going to find a teacher who can teach it to me. So she let me learn it, and then I learned that, and then it was just kind of one step after the next, And then about a year before I went to college, I got with Dr. Dean Shank at Rice University. He was part of this piano program that they offered for students who were not of college age yet. So I got
like a preparatory program.
A preparatory program. Yeah, I got into that preparatory department for about a year before I went to college, and studied with him for a year. And he took my my playing from here to far beyond that, and so really prepared me for going off to college, where I went to Oklahoma and studied piano performance there. I took 2 years with 2 different teachers, and both of them kind of took me to multiple different levels from there on. And actually in college I started doing more composing as well.
And so then what was did you do any composing when you were in high school, or was it mainly?
I did a lot of improvising actually in high school. And so I would just sit down and improvise for hours at the piano. And it's kind of how I started playing piano, with improvisation.
Did you do any jazz, or is it just
kind of whatever I could learn, or so my dad taught me a jazz scale when I was a kid, and so I used to improvise with that a lot, blues scale. And so I would kind of there was no clear line between classical and blues for my improvisations. It was a mixture of the two. And to this day, I think I still have that kind of jazz language in my writing style.
Yeah, definitely.
As you were saying in the piece,
exactly.
There's elements of that, and I do like the freedom with which jazz can flow between ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another thing that you do outside of piano and composing is that you actually run your own organization, the Houston New Arts Movement. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So this concert coming up is a Houston New Arts Movement concert. Mm-hmm. And in college, actually, it kind of connects with where we left off in my story. Mm-hmm. In college, about halfway through, I started reading about these Russian composers who were oppressed under Stalin's rule. And so there was all this music that they were discovering. There was one book that was called Music of the Repressed Russian Avant-Garde. Mm-hmm. And it was all these composers who had all these ideas that we weren't studying in music history because they were sort of unrelated and they were their own unique little worlds that these composers were creating. And just the story of that, sort of those ideas being isolated in Russia at the time period was fascinating to me. And so I just got obsessed with it. I started ordering the scores through interlibrary loan, getting as much information about that time period and sort of like a mystery. I had to solve the mystery of that, those composers. And so I was discovering that. I was also at the time kind of frustrated that I wasn't able to do as much chamber music as I'd like. You're as a piano performance major, you're isolated in a little room. You practice for hours, and you're 4 padded walls.
I mean, that's how I felt with Shakuhachi. I mean, because all the music is solo repertoire. So
you don't have anything besides your solo instrument. Yeah. And as a performance major, it's important to get that ability to play solo.
Yeah, but I guess in hindsight, we do have Shakuhachi and koto music, but finding a koto player who is readily available in America, and it's difficult. But I understand that, and I spending especially as a composer, because composition was my major in college, so I spent a lot of time with the 4 walls of the piano. So it's a similar situation as well.
It's a standard, as a composer, you start on the piano most of the time.
I actually never played piano.
Really,
I never played piano. I'm so bad at piano. Like.
So when you compose, do you...
Well, it's interesting for me, like for composing, but I do use a piano, and a lot of times I get stuck, and I usually use the piano to find harmonies and stuff like that, and then from there, it's all just on paper. So once I have harmonic layout, then I'm good to go. But my piano skill is very minimal. Like I'm not like this sort of pianist. Yeah. But I can rock "Mary Had a Little Lamb."
Well, there you go.
I can provide some incorrect harmonies as well.
Often requested at children's concerts.
Exactly. Now, it's interesting because you do lots of performing on piano, and I want to mention some of those composers that you're playing as well, because one of them, I can't remember his name, starts with an S, has really, really difficult music. And
Alfred Schnittke?
Not Schnittke. One of the pieces
Sarabji.
Yes, Sarabji.
Sarabji, yeah.
Now, a lot of the music that you've showed me, I find it hard to believe that there's a bunch of other piano players that can actually perform this music. So you're really one of very few people that have this unique skill set to read 7 staves of music at once.
Yeah, up to 7 staves at once. It's deciphering that music, making sense of it, musically too, because even if you can kind of figure out the rhythms, it's like, well, what's important then to bring out that texture of and he writes, this is Sarabji that we're talking about. He writes contrapuntally, but beyond the 4 or 5 voices at times, and then each of those voices can be a color, like a chord. So you're dealing with that. You're also dealing with the rhythms of traditional. It's free music. It's Indian Carnatic music, essentially. The inspiration of Carnatic music and the complications that evolve from that, which is hard to even describe
grasp on its own.
To grasp on its own, because it's an improvisatory style traditionally, even within the classical tradition of Carnatic music. For 2, there's these spinning outs of melodies that come from little pieces of melodies that are already in development, and so it's just this incredibly complex set of skills. He's translating that to a more notated style of writing, along with his sense of sort of modern harmony and dense chord structures. So up to 5 or 6 note chords for
with 7 staves and difficult rhythms,
with multiple voices,
and at the same time he created his own notational system that has a different meaning. Where some of I don't remember, because I remember you were explaining to me, but he actually had certain symbols that it almost kind of worked like 12-tone music, that if there was a sharp there, it only applied to that note.
Yeah, so that's true. I was thinking, but you were thinking of a different composer. But yeah, Sorabji does in his music. He, instead of, and it's actually helpful in this complex of music. Instead of having to think, okay, this D is sharp for the entire measure, because there's so many staves and it's just too complex to apply that system. So instead he'll sharp a D here. If it's not sharped again, it's not sharped. So you just you leave as is. Yeah. Otherwise, it actually makes more sense to do it that way with his music. So.
But because I remember when you showed it to me and you were playing some of it, I mean I would hate to be your page turner.
Oh yeah.
And the score is like this thick. It's something that blows my mind that you're able to play that. And I mean I've never seen another pianist be able to do that.
Yeah.
At least.
I think my goal in sort of learning partially was I found the music itself fascinating and unique. He has that's the main reason. It's a unique voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really upset that I didn't learn about him sooner. And I'm glad because I learned about him through you because I discovered a lot of his orchestral music.
Right.
Along with...
It's really performed again. Yeah. There's a ton of it out there. He wrote volumes and volumes of music. That's the thing. And they have an archive now run by, I think it's one of his good friends, Alistair Hinton, who has catalogs all of his works. So they're doing a lot to preserve and pass on his works now. Performing, it's a rarer thing, and it takes time. There's one pianist, Telef Johnson, who has been working on supposedly his fifth sonata, which is one of his biggest pieces, larger than the score that I showed you, which is I think 350 pages. I think this one is 500 something up there in the 500 pages. And you're talking about fugues, multi-voice. It's not just the length; it's the density.
Yes.
So.
Oh, I'm glad that your piece is not that long.
Yeah, I tend to write shorter pieces than that.
Thank God. Let's move on to your piece because so a lot of these things have obviously inspired you because you wouldn't have taken so much interest now in them. But do these composers inspire your music at all? Like, do they inform your musical language, or where do you get your musical language from?
Certainly, yeah. Certain composers stand out as bigger inspirations than others. I owe a lot to Shostakovich. He was the first composer I discovered who could express sarcasm in music so effectively, I thought.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so, in such a raw way. And in general, I appreciate composers whose language has immediacy to it. So it hits you with something that, that grasps you, pulls you into it. And in that sense, they're still have their roots in Romanticism. And that immediacy of emotion.
So do you appreciate a lot of like narrative structures or just emotional content that's able to be perceived instantaneously?
I think first emotion. I think that it has to hit me on that level. And then I think that the structure kind of follows from that.
So when you say emotion, do you mean like something that speaks to human nature or something that we just can relate to in terms of like, this sounds sad or this sounds, angry or this sounds sarcastic? Does it need to sound that way or actually be something that we're,
I think
deeper?
I mean, I think as I've grown as a musician, more of those aspects I can appreciate it from almost any angle. However, I do think that if I sit and listen to a piece that's purely calculated logic, it has less, in the end, it just has less impact for me. And I think we kind of, as composers, I think through history, a lot of them have discovered that too. We've moved away from a lot of serialism, and some people still do that, and and I've written serial pieces even,
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of composers, at least kind of dip their, test the waters out with
test it out,
just to see if it's for them. Because I
think there's some really effective uses of it. For example, like there's a Hinastera sonata that's has a 12-tone repeated motive, but again, it's a sound world to me. 12-tone serialism is a sound world that you can use to express a certain mood. And it's sort of this spacey, out there. It can be, there's variances of moods that it can express. But it's a color more so to me than a compositional rigor to it.
And I always felt like Webern really had the best approach with 12 tone.
Wonderful approach.
And also, it's not technically real serialism, but Berg also had a wonderful approach to it as well. Now, what about the title of your piece?
Dialogues.
Yeah. Is there any significance behind it? Why you titled it that?
Yes. So what you hear in the piece is initially a solo statement from the shakuhachi. That's very pointed. You know, it makes a point in a sense. Yeah. And I think that's how any good dialogue begins. Is you make a point and then you discuss it. And so the piano sort of mirrors that back,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Which is good dialogue. So that sort of, I hear what you're saying, sound.
But, so now, would you say that there's like a little bit of an argument or disagreement, or if it's clarifying ideas, how would you express that?
I'd say it's both, actually.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I think that in argument, and I think this is part of good dialogue, is that if you're really listening to each other, you can also pick apart what each other say when people are having a discussion. And so in the piece, each voice kind of picks apart what the other one says and pulls it into some new space. And eventually we get to a sort of reflective part of the piece in the middle, after all of that sort of back and forth arguing. And that is sort of this moment, I think, that a lot of people I don't think do take in dialogue, which is time away from dialogue to think about what's been said.
Oh yeah, especially such in a world where dialogue is so instantaneous.
Right.
It's right. It is hard to break away from
exactly. And so I think that how many people remember the conversations they had with people, much less reflect on those conversations. So you can reflect with somebody about maybe a work of art, or you reflect about something maybe you both experienced. But I think we've, as a culture in general, we've lost some of the art of experiencing dialogue. So in a sense, the middle section of the piece is that break of saying, hey, what was just said here? What was just exchanged? And what happens is the piano sort of retreats and the shakuhachi takes over. And so it starts in a low register, which is, I think, in general, there's something about low registers that kind of put people on edge.
I would, for me, I can see how it puts people on edge for when you're writing it. But when I'm writing it for piano, it's an interesting perspective, is that I always found the lower registers, especially just, whether it's orchestra or piano, is a sense of groundedness, a sense of like gravity is holding me down and keeping me, stable.
Well, right. And it's a stability thing, actually. But in a sense, I try to create a vacuum with that stability to start from. So emptiness. And then out of that emerges something different than what we just heard. And it builds in its own sort of intensity. It's a different kind of intensity than the previous back and forth, fast-paced dialogue. It builds more in a slow burning kind of dissonance to a point, again, of actually to a point of return to the initial idea. And so again, it's got overall kind of a sonata, structure, ABA sort of structure to it. But at the end, after it's returned to this previous theme, the opening, you get sort of a transformation of that theme, which is, and transformation is a concept I've been fascinated with for many concerts. We've done a series of transformations in the past, and I think the works that I've heard that have influenced me the most are those works that somehow transform the material into something sort of unexpected, but also that really works. And so this sort of transformation happens in my piece with a major chord that comes in the piano. So we've had a lot of minor chords or dissonances or sort of free flowing.
Yeah, you love minor ninths.
Yeah, minor ninths are one of my favorite sounds. And so you have a lot of these sort of free-flowing dissonances that are angular and sort of stark. When you contrast that with a pure major chord, not in root position, but it's an inverted major chord, but still, when you have that major sound,
it's really powerful. It really is. That's what I noticed about when we landed on that part in rehearsal a couple nights ago. I felt like, wow, I can feel a real sense of arrival, but I wasn't expecting a rival. It's almost like just was transported right to that moment of realization. And I guess that's, if I'm just assuming the story properly, it's after that reflection. It doesn't hit you until way after. But if you didn't have that initial reflection, that moment, that aha moment, would never have come.
Right. Yeah. That's very well. Yeah. The structure of the piece actually, and I and I have to reflect on these things afterwards. So because I write very intuitively, kind of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I am the same way as well. So actually, we had an interesting discussion before about, before we were going to do this, you said, I don't know what I'm going to talk about on my own piece. And it's really interesting because I had a good friend who's actually an author. And she told me that when she finished her book, she was supposed to write something on the back. And she's like, what the hell did I write about? Yeah. And she has no idea what's put in the back. And I thought, that's what I have the problem. Like, I'm so into the piece and I know what it's about. And then at the end, I said, I don't know how I wrote this piece. I don't know where it came from. But other composers are very well organized and they know exactly what they wrote and they know exactly what they're going to write about or whatnot. Right.
Well, you have, Mozart's immaculate scores and things like that are just, perfect. But it's, and it's not that way for me as far as writing. It's a lot more of a process. And I try to...
Well, I wish I was, like Mozart.
Right. It would be wonderful.
Yeah, just write the full opera score nice? in a week.
Have it done in a week. No.
Yeah. But did you have any struggles writing for Shakuhachi? Were there things that you were hoping that it could do, or what was your general take about when I said, why don't you write a piece for Shakuhachi? What was your thought?
That I had no idea how to write a piece for Shakuhachi. And the closest thing that I've done is flute, actually. I've written a few... flute and clarinet duets, but I really had no idea until, and what I did listen to a number of videos, and so I started to hear the sound of it, and so
did you have any realizations after contemplating these things or having any reflection time after listening to it? Did you have any overall feelings of what Shakuhachi was going to be for you in this piece?
Well, I think it was. It ended up being sort of a vehicle for a different kind of expression, in a sense. And I think I was also intrigued by the idea, maybe it's a bit removed from the literal sound of a shakuhachi, but the idea of a traditional Japanese instrument exploring some of the extremes of Western tonality and the pushes that have happened with that. So it's that mixing of the East and the West. And I think that's what fascinates me. I'm very much into Russian music. One of the things that fascinates me about that culture is that mix of East and West.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
And so I think that you get a really interesting picture with that because you have these reflective moments that come from that Eastern sensibility, and then you have these very impassioned moments that come from the Western, more so the Western Romantic tradition that hit you sort of immediately. And so I like contrasting those. I like putting them together and sort of letting them bounce off one another.
So our concert is going to be next week Thursday on February 28th,
7 p.m.
7 p.m. at St. Cyril of Alexandria, right?
Yes.
Okay, St. Cyril of Alexandria Roman Catholic Church, and that's on Westheimer, correct?
Yeah, it's 10503 Westheimer Road, and it's going to be at 7 p.m. as we said, and tickets are available now on artsmove.net.
Yeah, and so if they order in advance, it's $15, but if they wait until the door,
it's $20.
It's $20. It's $5 extra. You can save yourself $5 if you just come a little bit earlier.
Just a little bit.
And then we have a special deal for students, right?
Right. Yeah. Contact us for student pricing, and you can send an email to info@artsmove.net.
Okay, that's good to know. And I'm really looking forward because on the program
I'm looking forward to it too.
So let's talk a little bit about that program just to finish it off, since it does have a little bit of that connotation, and it'll be nice to look back. I mean, one of the big reasons why I do these composer interviews is so I can look back in 20 years and go, oh, I remember when I did that, and I remember when I did this. But so we're playing a piece of mine as well for Shakuhachi and Piano. We're doing a piece by Bo Lee. Then I have a piece by Shinrong Sai for solo. But what are the solo piano pieces that you're playing?
I'm playing the Yoshimatsu 3 waltzes, set of 3 waltzes of his.
And I don't think I've ever heard these before.
You've never heard them?
I don't think I've heard them.
Yeah, so There's 3 waltzes. I first heard, and it was one of the first pieces I heard by him, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was incredibly beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
He writes really beautiful but not trite melodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was struck by that. It was the Waltz for the Rainbow-Colored Roses is the name of the piece. And, very colorful, very sort of an Eastern sensibility to that title, too.
Mm-hmm.
Very poetic.
I feel like I shouldn't keep saying this, but I always think that when I hear his music, I instantly think the Ravel of Japan.
Yeah,
and I don't really think that's a bad. I mean, that's a really great name.
It is, and it's a very big compliment too.
Yeah,
to live up to Ravel's.
Because even his notation and like the way he orchestrates is just masterful. It's really beautiful.
Oh yeah. Well, and I've noticed even in his piano writing is that he has a good sense of what makes a piano sound the way he wants it to sound, the colors, and and even the choices of keys, and
he makes a monotembral instrument sound like a full symphony, and it's very colorful and very beautiful, much like Ravel does in his music.
Right, he takes full advantage of the natural sonority of the instrument, I think. And that's a challenging thing for a composer to do, because especially for writing for multiple instruments, which Yoshimatsu does.
Yes, and very well.
Incredibly well. And I discovered him through these piano pieces, like I said, but I've since then listened to his orchestral works, and there's a range of color there that's just phenomenal. And
you should play his piano concerto.
That would be play it.
That would be so cool.
It's on my list now.
Yeah.
I have a list of piano concertos that I'd love to do. So
I think we actually have to get started in rehearsal.
We do.
We have to play all this music.
Right.
Not just talk
next
about
week.
it.
Yeah.
So we're gonna head off then. Thank you so much for watching the video, and we hope to see you next week.
Yes.
And if you're watching the archive version of this, you missed the concert, but maybe you can buy the CD that I'll have at that time with his piece Dialogues for Shakuhachi and Piano on it.
And you can continue to attend our concerts with the Houston New Arts Movement. We do classical concerts that have visual artwork and poetry and just a mix of mediums at each event. And we always offer time to visit after the concerts with the composers and the performers.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time for the next composer.
See you then.